Hello, and welcome to Book Solid, New Canaan Library's podcast for adventurous readers across all genres. I'm your host, Kathleen, a collections librarian.
I'm your host, James, a reference and instruction librarian.
And I'm your host, Kat, a children's librarian.
And today we are discussing Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer.
I just want to give a quick spoiler warning. This book is kind of impossible to spoil. It's almost 400 pages long of nature writing and memoir sort of essays, but we are going to be discussing 3 of the chapters in great detail. The chapters that we're discussing are Aster and Goldenrod, The Teachings of Grass, and The Sacred and the Superfund. And I think that you will probably get more out of this conversation if you read those 3 chapters prior to listening.
Yeah, I agree. So just kind of a broader overview of kind of what the book is about here. So Braiding Sweetgrass is it's a collection of stories and essays written by Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer that examines our understanding of plants, nature, and the relationships and responsibilities that people have to the environment. As a trained botanist, Kimmerer understands the way the world's seen through the lens of scientific objectivity, but as a member of the citizen Potawatomi Nation, she also kind of brings with her like a trove of traditional knowledge, storytelling ability, viewpoints that she infuses every chapter of the book with that really makes this such a unique reading experience.
Before we dive into the 3 essays in great detail, let's just talk a little bit about what we thought of the book. This was my second time reading it, and the first time I read it, it had a really huge impact on me. It's, I think, partially why I wrote my master's thesis on environmental education in libraries. And I enjoyed it even more, I would say, the second time around, though it is a book that I will say I think is probably best enjoyed more slowly than I read it.
Yeah, I will fully second the enjoy the book more slowly than I read it aspect of that comment, because this is my first time reading it, and I did greatly enjoy it, but this is the type of book where I slow down from my usual kind of breakneck pace of reading to where every other kind of sentence I'm looking up a plant. I'm looking up a plant's, scientific name. I'm looking up where that plant grows. I'm looking up this culture or this nation. Where are they from? Where do they go? What's their history? So while reading this book for the podcast, I truly have never read a book more slowly in my life before. So lots of interesting diversions or parts to look into on your own while reading this book.
I agree with that. I did regret that I didn't pick up this book the second that we decided on it for the podcast, because I think reading a few chapters over the course of several weeks or months even would have been a much richer experience. There's just so much depth to these personal stories that she's telling, these insights into the natural world, things that I would have liked to spend more time with. So I think at times, it could almost feel repetitive because I was just reading chapter after chapter, page after page. And when I was able to sit with them, I think they just resonated so greatly. They were so thoughtful. They really made me think about things that I'd never thought about before. I will say that going into this, I was a little nervous because this is not something that I usually pick up. I don't read a lot of nature writing. I don't go in nature a lot. So for me to, from the first pages, immediately be all in and just think, she's a great writer, first of all. So I think that's something that, I don't know that I was expecting the writing to be so poetic, but also it's just so thoughtful and interesting, and the metaphors, the way she's drawing. The metaphor, first of all, I think of braiding sweetgrass is a great one to tie the whole book together, and the sections of the book are these different divisions of, gathering the sweetgrass and braiding it and all of these different things. But I just thought it was so well done and so well put together, and my biggest regret is just not having more time to spend on it.
I spent a full, I'm going to say day and a half looking up how ponds, the health of a pond after reading a story in this. I was like, ooh, what's the life cycle of a pond in this way? And that was a full day I spent not reading the book.
That is actually one of my favorite things about reading science nature writing. I haven't read as much in the past couple of years, but it is one of my favorite types of nonfiction to read, is just the way that it can inspire you to approach the natural world with more knowledge and attention, and therefore I think greater appreciation, which is a big part of what this book is arguing as well. Let's go ahead and talk about the first of the 3 sort of chapters that we wanted to discuss in more detail today, which is Aster and Goldenrod.
So in this chapter, Kimmerer is describing her experiences as a college botany student. She enters college to study forestry, and in her freshman intake interview tells the interviewer that she wants to study botany so that she can understand why asters and goldenrod look so beautiful together. She's told that this is not a scientific question. This is kind of like a beauty in the eye of the beholder kind of thing. It's art. It's really not science. So the chapter kind of goes on to explore how this love of plants and her traditional way of seeing the beauty and relationships between them is supplanted by scientific teaching, which revolves around separating species and being objective. She also, in the course of her recounting of this, she talks about how she faces misogyny and racism as a Native scholar. Later, as a faculty member in the university in the field of botany, she's able to interact with Native plant knowledge holders and return to more traditional ways of knowing and understanding plants that works alongside of her scientific knowledge that she learned during her PhD program. The chapter argues that traditional ecological knowledge and science can work together, much like how aster and goldenrod may have evolved side by side in the colors yellow and purple, so that their contrast attracts more pollinators together than they would on their own.
This is one of the last sort of essays in the opening portion of the book, and the opening portion describes her childhood, which was filled with reverence for nature and a way of observing and being with plants in deep gratitude, and coming to like the Western Academy with that mindset and having that not be appreciated as like its own skill set is still such a powerful moment in the book. It's such a harsh kind of slap in the face from kind of quite a gentle opening, I would say.
I really liked this chapter as an introduction to the themes that we will see play out throughout. And I think because so many of these stories are so deeply personal, I mean, a few of them aren't as directly related to her life, but many of them are. And this one in particular shows you just the path she's taken as a student, as a scholar, and the ideas of teaching, I think, and being a student are such a big theme of the book, particularly because of the idea of the land as teacher as well. Mm-hmm. And I think so there's something more humble about her, I think, as an academic than the professors that she's talking about, who are saying that they understand because they are kind of exercising their own dominion over the land, over things, and so they have decided what it is rather than listened. And so I just think this is a great chapter to really lay out all of those ideas. It's obviously very frustrating to hear about that, but I also like that she proves just how wrong that idea of why aster and goldenrod look beautiful together, why that is not the silly question that she's being told, and gives a good reasoning for all of that. It's just I don't know. I just really thought it was great for the metaphorical resonance of this science and poetry, and you're obviously seeing the beauty of the natural world, the beauty of her writing. It really felt like both sort of a thesis statement for the book and such a great introduction to her as a person and what she is about.
I think this is an excellent recounting of an instance in which the objectivity that we're trained to consider is necessary for any kind of real scientific rational understanding of the world and our environment and our place in it. That kind of demand for objectivity is not necessarily true in every instance. In this instance, she's kind of framing that through her experience, saying, aster and goldenrod look beautiful together, and I want to know why that is. She's told that's not objective. You're too close to the subject. You need to remove yourself from that and look at it that way. Turns out that, as you said, they look beautiful together for a scientific reason, because they are trying to attract pollinators due to their contrasting colors. That's a objectively true reason about why that is happening, discovered through, in this case, the botanist's origin story of why do those flowers look pretty together. That's a completely legitimate way to start searching for knowledge.
I think that there's this really intensely harsh, false dichotomy in our understanding of knowledge, where we say that the artistic is always separate from the scientific, mm-hmm. The humanities are always separate from the sciences, when in fact, I think that together they form just like a stronger way of knowing the world. And I love the use of aster and goldenrod's contrast drawing pollinators being the perfect metaphor for saying, actually, when traditional ecological knowledge and science are next to each other, we can see their strengths more clearly. They're able to teach us more about the world together than they ever could possibly if we were to separate them.
They're complementary. They're not diametrically opposed.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I feel like that comes up again and again with, for example, the story of the three sisters. Mm-hmm. So corn, beans, and squash or pumpkin. So she explains in great detail just why they are better together. So there is maybe a strength in one area that another does not have, but then they have a strength in an area that is supporting that plant. And so it helps them to get the nutrients they need, to grow, to provide nourishment for those harvesting them. So I like that comes up again in different ways. And just the idea that you can't be separate and objective from the land. The land is not something that you just observe and you don't need to have a relationship with. I mean, she talks about particularly the idea of gifts and what we get from the land is a gift that we must honor and be respectful for. But it also creates this ongoing relationship. So you can't have an ongoing relationship with something and then just view it objectively and then just view it as something that you don't have any influence on and has no influence on you.
She describes how she imagines that one of the first things she saw as an infant was a field of aster and goldenrod. It was a fixture of her childhood. And that's why it was her love for those plants that drew her to scientific inquiry. And that dismissal of love and care, I think it does have an element of misogyny to it. This idea of like men being viewed as inherently rational versus women being viewed as inherently emotional, when in fact her care and love for those plants is what drew her to a scientific question with real scientific merit as well. I'm thinking a lot about the chapter Old Growth Children as well, which is about the rewilding of a portion of a clear-cut forest in the Pacific Northwest that now serves as a like writer/artist in residence space. It was a place of ecological restoration that is now a site for artistic inspiration, which is like another instance of this idea of like the arts and sciences are inherently connected and make one another stronger.
I think this chapter also is a pretty good kind of introduction to the idea that ideally these bastions of science and learning are meritocracies that blindly look at everybody who goes through their doors and says, if you achieve here, honestly, you will be, rewarded, and we're not judging you by anything else but the merits. Whereas this chapter, in a positive letter, basically recommending her for a prestigious program, her advisor said she's done remarkably well for an Indian girl.
Yeah.
Which is, so that stuff is going on in the background. So whenever you're reading, chapters in this book, and you're finding instances where people are a little resistant or hesitant towards any kind of project or idea that might emerge from a traditional understanding or a traditional knowledge of nature, the environment, that kind of thing. It's helpful with this chapter kind of to act as like a primer to be like, okay, like this stuff might be going on in the background, even if people are like using it as like, oh, like she's done well for herself. But like,
yes.
This is happening in the background. It's not something that you can ignore while reading this book.
And also that, she really did embrace scientific inquiry. She thrived and was accepted into a really prestigious master's program, went on to get her PhD. And it wasn't until she had her PhD that she was able to return by interacting with Native knowledge holders. Specifically, I know she mentions a Navajo knowledge holder, that she's able to return to a traditional way of understanding plants. And she describes that experience as sort of coming home.
Yeah. No, I think that's so great. I think initially it feels very tragic, but ultimately very uplifting that she realizes what she lost in trying so hard to fit into that box of academia and what was expected of her, which is something she could excel at, but she was pushing down what was lost. And when she was able to reclaim that and see how much stronger she is, I think, even as a scientist, as a person engaging with the world, there's this realization of like, this is so much better. And there's that time that was lost, but now she can regain that and she can work with that knowledge.
It also folds into the discussions of the residential school era, which is brought up throughout this book, which is that her grandfather was taken to a residential school, and thus her family lost many traditional ways that they would have held on to. And by lost, I mean they were stolen from them, essentially, due to the residential school era. And that returning home, that ability to come home to traditions that were taken from you is one of a few sort of full circle moments in the book, I would say.
Definitely.
Well, I do just want to say, before we move on to our discussion of the next chapter, we did mention that the author's writing is it's beautiful, it's concise, but it's poetic. There's a lot of really great stuff that the author is doing with writing in this book. I would like to insult the author's writing here. In this chapter, there is a line where she mentions that botanists are going on a foray and writers go on a metaphore. And I had to take a walk after I read that.
Are you hate puns that much? You just made several puns about this book earlier.
I did, but this was a real humdinger.
I liked this. It made me smile.
But we all remembered it.
We did all remember it. We did all remember it. And hey, maybe we all remembered it. That is a good thing. It'll make the book stick in your brain.
It's
exactly.
memorable.
It's memorable.
It's memorable.
a teaching technique.
Yes.
Speaking of memorable, the next chapter we're going to discuss actually has a really memorable structure.
Yes. So the next chapter is The Teachings of Grass. So it's written in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way within the framework of a scientific paper, with its sections being divided into the traditional introduction, literature review, hypothesis, methods, that kind of thing. The experiment that is being discussed here regards sweetgrass and how responsible harvesting of sweetgrass actually helps that plant to flourish as instead of it being left alone to grow on its own. One of Kimmerer's graduate students, Lori, proposes this idea to the university, and they say that it's not useful, it's not really science, that's not really a proposal, what's going on here? But they don't accept that. Lori and Kimmerer create an experiment that measures how sweetgrass growth is affected by harvesting methods, in which they discover pretty definitively that sweetgrass that is harvested in a traditional fashion flourishes and thrives, whereas, as stated previously, if you leave sweetgrass alone, it's actually less likely to survive, less likely to thrive, fewer new plants grow. This knowledge is old news to traditional harvesters and sweetgrass basket makers, though in the chapter itself it does say that there might have been some disagreement between which traditional method of harvesting hurt or helped the sweetgrass enough so this experiment actually kind of brought a new answer to that, which is helpful for everybody. And it argues that the academy should be more receptive to traditional knowledge holders and that humans are a vital part of the ecosystem, not separate observers.
So this chapter touches on some of the really big arguments the book is making. First, the sentence, all flourishing is mutual, is repeated multiple times throughout the book.
Yeah.
And this is one of the chapters where I feel like it really hits home. We take care of sweetgrass, the sweetgrass grows more beautifully, and it takes care of us. It also really addresses the idea that humans can actually have a positive impact in the environment, and that by trying to just sort of leave nature alone as a way of healing it will never be enough, as opposed to humans becoming part of the ecosystem and a responsible kind of community member of the ecosystem.
I feel like I do want to jump in on this because I feel like the humans leaving things alone, how in the chapter when they're presenting their research project to the committee, they say that, well, the committee says, of course, leaving plants alone is going to make the plants, that's, if you harvest a plant, you're going to damage the plant, you're going to hurt its growth. Like, leaving plants alone is just kind of the way it goes. And I felt like reading this chapter, I was wondering if it was kind of a reactionary thing, where it's like leaving them alone, because historically, when we make use of things in the environment, we tend to overuse those things to the point where they go extinct occasionally from time to time. And while reading this, I was struck with the idea of, is this kind of like a reaction where we just need to not touch this stuff anymore, because every time we try to do anything with it, we kind of ruin it, so we just have to remove ourselves, and then maybe that'll make it better.
My understanding of environmental education and environmentalism in the US, which is the only place I've really looked into this, is that by and large, a lot of non-native academics who really care about the environment were very reactionary in that way. Just leave it alone. Don't touch it. Nature will take care of itself. Despite the fact that the continent known as Turtle Island, North America, has been tended to for thousands and thousands of years. And then, in fact, the environments we view as quote-unquote natural when European explorers arrived were carefully tended to environments. So the idea of controlled burns, I think, is a really key example. Controlled burns were They were banned in the US for a long time, and it's now that traditional knowledge holders have come forward and are actually being listened to, and now that wildfires are getting more common, that we're recognizing that controlled burns were happening for thousands of years because the environment thrives when we take care of it in this way. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting, and this is tying some things together for me, which I didn't really put together so much, because I'm thinking they're pushing back, they don't understand, but I'm not thinking, oh, there's a reason for it. And it really does seem to tie into another chapter that she has in the book about the honorable harvest. Mm-hmm. And the idea, basically, that you would never take more than half of something, that you would take what you need, but not exploit the land, which obviously that is where we get into trouble. Yeah. So I do think it's nice just to see how all of these things kind of circle each other and tie in together. And so I can read one chapter and then it gets recontextualized when I read another chapter, or I start to tie things together. And she doesn't always even have to be really explicit and spell it out.
Yes.
It's just that all of these ideas are interconnected and they all draw upon each other, so that the further you go in the book, the more you're starting to piece these things together. I mean, I guess it's a really great learning tool. It is kind of like listening to a lecture from a really great teacher, where you just start to think, oh, okay, I see how these things are related now.
And it's worth saying that the scholars who Kimmerer was working with, of course, observed that there are many plants who are harmed by harvesting them. The point is to get to know the plants and all of the creatures that interact with that plant so that you can harvest it honorably, which is just tying it right back to the honorable harvest.
And I know we talked about the structure of the story, but the fact that this recounting is framed in the language, the literal framework of, the academic scientific research paper is just incredible. Yes. I fully lost it when I realized what was going on here. I stood up and I was like, this is poetry to me. Like, this feels like a poem in a way.
This is the standout
It's so
section.
playful. It's so fun. But then it doesn't detract from any other part of this. This is just the strength of the writing here, because this is an incredible story about people finding something that is interesting and that they think that science could help, shed some understanding on, pursuing it in the face of adversity, coming back with actual, genuine, new knowledge to maybe even all groups involved in some ways, and just triumphing over it. It's just an incredible chapter. It was my favorite in the book. You could sell this on its own and I would buy it.
Absolutely.
I was thrilled with this.
I think my favorite part is the references, which she lists as, I think buffalo is one of the references, which, yes, correct.
Yeah.
Should we move on to the final essay we wanted to talk about today?
Yes. This is a bit of a kind of a downer in a lot of ways.
Very true.
From this previous chapter where there's kind of a triumph. This is the Sacred and the Superfund, which is a chapter that kind of describes the pollution and destruction of Onondaga Lake in New York. It's that lake near Syracuse, in case anyone's unfamiliar with that. And it was destroyed by corporate greed. And it's about activists who are attempting to hold corporations like Honeywell, who largely contributed to that pollution, to account. The activism is driven largely by citizens of the Onondaga Nation, part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, a league of native nations that are referenced throughout the book. The Onondaga Nation sought to have the lake returned to being under tribal sovereignty, but were dismissed by U.S. courts. But they are still fighting for the restoration of the lake, along with their allies. Kimmerer argues that being involved in restoring the natural world is an antidote to despair over the destruction of ecosystems, and by partnering with others, we create community.
Mm-hmm. This whole last section of the book is about the climate crisis. It's about corporate greed and overconsumption alongside activism and the power of action as an antidote to despair. It is a long and difficult chapter. I think it was one of the ones that impressed me most with Kimmerer's writing, because she weaves together oral traditions and the story of Hiawatha and the Peacemakers, along with the story of the lake, the story of the activists, the story of many people who drew attention to the plight of Onondaga, and, of course, to the science behind how Lake Onondaga was destroyed.
Mm-hmm. There's so many excellent parts of this chapter, from the story about Peacemaker, kind of the establishing of a sacred site just because of how important it is to the nations that emerged from that meeting, that kind of effort, to the harrowing journey of a drop of rain as it goes from being water to something that will burn your skin if it touches it.
Like bleach, yeah.
Like bleach. Just truly the range of storytelling in this chapter I was so impressed with. There's a part where Kimmerer is exploring the shores of the lake and stumbles across a haunted house. Hayride thing. And it's just, there's no part of this that was ever kind of like hard for me to read in that sense. Like, it was so readable. I was just going through it, and then I was like, I really wish none of this bad stuff had happened to this poor lake.
Yeah. I think
and
part
these
of
people.
the intelligence of the design of the structure of this book is that you're just flooded with appreciation and gratitude, and then you get to this last chapter armed with a new appreciation for the natural world, and she says, now that you have this appreciation, here's what you have to do with it.
Yeah.
I think that's great, and I don't know that I put that together, that it is so cumulative, and you are thinking in a different way. You are feeling so much more strongly about what you owe to the land, and so then you have this chapter, and it is so much more horrifying because of all that came before it, because you have that appreciation that is so much stronger. It's vivid, it's visceral. I mean, all of those details are horrifying, but also, I mean, I felt all of them. Like, I mean, just the idea of like the acid rain, or it's almost a little funny. I mean, it's when she's walking and she's just like, I'm going to see for myself. And then she finds the scenes from the haunted hayride. And you're like, there's a dead body, there's this, there's that. And then she explains it like, right after she introduces it. But there's this one really incongruous moment before you get to the next paragraph. And you're like, what is going on? But she's saying, well, that's basically what it is. It's a house of horrors. It's just all of these injustices to the land, and you should be horrified. And so it's such a wild juxtaposition, because I didn't see it coming, but it felt so apt once she started to really delve into it, and it just felt really effective.
I really liked also just like the horror of this specific chapter is she is, as you were saying before, she's kind of training you to get ready for what this is.
Yes.
And it's kind of in the text too. It's mentioned where she mentions, I was trying to clean up my little pond, and then I'm facing this. And I was like, you brought me through the little pond cleaning story earlier. Yeah. And I said, wow, that was really hard to do. And now you're taking me to this lake where the parts of the lake shore aren't even soil or land. They're just literal industrial toxic waste that has been turned into something that looks like a natural lakeshore. Yeah. I looked up the cliffs that they're talking about, the Solvay processed cliffs or whatever, and I thought I was looking at the wrong image because it looked like a lakeshore. And it's like, no, this is actually pure poison. Like, you cannot go here. This would hurt you very badly. And it's shocking the kind of environmental degradation that's happened so close to so many people.
And like, it's Kimmerer, so she's going to infuse moments of hope and community within the book. The sections about the plants that are slowly creeping along the lakeshore, the first things that are starting to try and heal the land, the first peacemakers, as she describes them. I was really, really moved when she described everyone bringing clean water to the lakeshore, like from their own places, including someone who came from Mount Fuji with a container of water as like a part of a ceremony to try and honor and like reclaim the lake. And the community that was built up. And then, of course, the defeat in U.S. courts that was just, like, absolutely devastating. As the proposal by the corporation, which had a solution that was a temporary stopgap that could fail at any time, was accepted instead.
Let's just bury it a little.
Let's
put some sand on that.
It's fine. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. This was the chapter I chose to pull the quote from. And I could have honestly read the entire, page this quote was on, but here is a sample of some of Kimmerer's writing in this section. It is not enough to weep for our lost landscapes. We have to put our hands in the earth to make ourselves whole again. Even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of wonder and joy. I choose joy over despair. Not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a great quote. And I do think it's so easy to fall into despair, and this idea that she's saying, this is the revolutionary act of choosing joy, of something that will not freeze you in place and just say, I wish things were differently. But, constantly finding these glimmers of hope, these things, it's really lovely.
She describes it as a huge mess has been made in Mother Earth's kitchen. We've been all eating from her table, and now it's time for someone to do the dishes. And that, like, if you've been at a party and chosen to be one of the people who does the dishes, you know that a lot of really great conversation happens in there. That's where community gets made.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is such an encouraging message to leave, that if you go out and choose to be a part of the work of restoring part of the natural environment, you will come across like-minded people with whom you can trust and bond.
Are we ready for read-alikes?
I think so. There's really nothing else like this book, but I do love science and nature writing, so I've picked a couple things that might appeal to readers of this book. The first is The Fox and I by Catherine Raven. This is more memoir than more like science writing, but I think one of the things it really has in common with Braiding Sweetgrass is that it is about a scientist who is really struggling with the idea of scientific objectivity. The author, Catherine Raven, was a former forest ranger, and she had this experience where this fox was coming to visit her at this remote cabin every day at the same time. And he would lay in the grass and she would look at him. And she was like embarrassed to tell her science friends because she was like, I don't want to anthropomorphize this animal as part of her scientific training. It is beautifully written. So if you're interested in sort of descriptions of the natural world and the relationships between humans and animals, I highly recommend it. I also recommend, if you're looking for more of the sciencey side, Other Lands by Thomas Halliday. It's a discussion of 16 lost ecosystems from across Earth's long natural history. It reminded me so much of being a kid and learning about dinosaurs and like the pure wonder and joy you feel. Like, if you ever want to recapture that magic, you got to read this book. It's absolutely wonderful.
So I wanted to recommend How to Do Nothing by Jenny Odell. I started thinking about recommending this book when I came across a quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer where she was asked, you know, how did you get to have this connection with a living world? And she says, you know, it's by paying attention. And so this book is about paying attention and particularly resisting the attention economy. So all of these things that compete, you know, all of our apps and, you know, like, look at this, buy this, do this, constantly, you know, hustle and be a part of this capitalistic society. But this is the idea of like, you know, what if you step back from that? What if you spend some time, you know, engaging with the natural world? She does a lot of that. You know, she's developing these relationships with like trees and like birds that she's observing. But really, I think in a weird way, these both feel like self-help books to me for people who don't necessarily gravitate to self-help books, which I've never really been able to get them to work for me, but it feels in a sense that these help me to think about things in a new way, which is what I would consider self-help. And so they kind of ask you to slow down and look at things and your place in the world differently. So I found them both really eye-opening and really helpful for just a new way to engage. And there's also this part in Braiding Sweetgrass where Kimmerer talks about she's doing a job that she could use a shovel for, but she uses a trowel instead. And it's taking her longer, but she's like, that's part of it. You can engage with the world. You can hear the birds. You can do these things while you're doing it, which you couldn't if you were just done immediately. And I just think this idea of slowing down and not getting something done immediately, not being part of just constantly moving forward and rushing through things and not appreciating them, that's something that this book talks about and Braiding Sweetgrass talks about, and I really liked that aspect.
That sounds really interesting. So for my suggestion, I chose Finding the Mother Tree, Discovering the Wisdom of the Forest by Suzanne Simard. This book was actually recommended by Robin Wall Kimmerer herself, who kind of talks about it, and she says that Finding the Mother Tree reminds us that the world is a web of stories connecting us to one another. The book carries the stories of trees, fungi, soil, and bears, and of a human being listening in on the conversation. The interplay of personal narrative, scientific insights, and the amazing revelations about the life of the forest make a compelling story. Which I was like, well, that's kind of a lot of what I liked in Braiding Sweetgrass, and if Robin Wall Kimmerer likes this book, and
I bet it's good.
This book, I bet that book's good.
I bet that's pretty good. On the last note, speaking of trees, James and I were talking earlier about how Kimmerer mentions that she always wished she could photosynthesize. And I remember reading that for the first time and being like, I thought I was the only one who wished I could photosynthesize. But it turns out...
I also wish that I could photosynthesize. I just thought it would be neat.
I just thought it'd be cool, yeah.
I'm going to weigh in. This never even crossed my mind.
She's fully lying. She definitely thinks about it all the time. It's her Roman Empire.
Okay, James, tell us about what we're reading
So,
next.
speaking about trees, we'll be reading The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. A little bit of a summary for you. So, early morning, August 1975, a camp counselor discovers an empty bunk. Its occupant, Barbara Van Laar, has gone missing. Barbara isn't just any 13-year-old. She's a daughter of the family that owns the summer camp and employs most of the region's residents. And this isn't the first time a Van Laar child has disappeared. Barbara's older brother similarly vanished 14 years ago, never to be found. As a panicked search begins, a thrilling drama unfolds. Chasing down the layered secrets of the Van Laar family and the blue-collar community working in shadow, Moore's multi-threaded story invites readers into a rich and gripping dynasty of secrets and second chances.
I read this book in 2 days, and it's like 500 pages, because it was just really, really thrilling and fast-paced. So I want to just relieve both of you. You don't need to book time right now to read it, to savor every page. This is a thriller, and you'll fly through it, probably.
I'm
That
very
sounds good.
excited. Yeah.
That sounds good.
All right. Well, that wraps it up for this episode. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.